back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by United States Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning, Senator.
Hey, Hugh. It's good to be on with you as always.
Well, I just talked to Brian Hook, Tom Cotton, your buddy, senior policy advisor on Iran. He walked through the revocation of the nuclear waiver for the Fordow site yesterday. How long do you think we should continue the waivers for the other three nuclear sites inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran?
I wouldn't take very long, Hugh, but first let me commend the president and the administration for revoking that waiver and also all the other many steps they've taken that is so different from the Obama-era policies towards Iran. You can see that on display just over the last few days. We have witnessed mass protests in Iran over the terrible state of their economy and the crackdown by the mullahs. And we have an administration now that is supporting the Iranian people and their aspirations for living in freedom with basic needs provided for, as opposed to what the Obama administration did in 2009, the last time you saw protests on this scale. So I commend the administration for their Iran policy, and I support the decision made yesterday, and I hope that we'll revoke those other waivers soon, too.
Now, I asked Brian Hook, what are we doing differently from 2009 when the Obama administration, led by the president at the time, stood aside and the Quds forces and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard mowed down people? His answer, pretty much everything. Are we doing everything we can right now, Senator Cotton, in your view, to assist the people of Iran to get their freedom?
Well, that's a pretty good description of the differences between the Obama-era policy and the president's policy. And let's not just focus on the protests in Iran either, Hugh. Let's look at the protests in Iraq and Lebanon. That's a direct result of our Iran policy. The mullahs have a lot of mouths to feed, not just their own people, but also groups like the paramilitary forces in Iraq or Hezbollah or Hamas. And the sanctions that we've put on Iran over the last 3 years have been squeezing their treasury. So as they cut back on funding for those organizations, many of which provide quasi-governmental services in the territories they control, as they cut back on subsidies in their own country, you see more and more unrest and protests against that situation. And again, that's a direct result of U.S. policy, not just the protests in Iran, but also in Iraq and Lebanon as well.
Now, I know we're trying very hard to make sure people understand these are organic protests against the regime. They are not being fueled by the United States. But do you believe regime change is possible there?
Hugh, dictatorships always seem very strong, and their collapse seems impossible until the moment it begins to seem inevitable. We just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and who would have predicted that a few years earlier? Who would have even predicted the fall of that wall just a few months earlier, Hugh? So I know that a government like Iran that's been around for 40 years, from the outside looking in, it seems incredibly strong and stable, but dictatorships always seem strong and stable until the moment when the weak edifice becomes exposed, is increasingly becoming exposed in Iran and in their drive for hegemony all around the region.
Now, Senator Cotton, I asked Brian Hook, and he demurred about the ability of the United States to disintermediate the mullahs from their offshore money. If we have that power, ought we to impoverish these dictators and these tyrants?
Hugh, I will say that we ought to take every steps we can to ensure that the Ayatollahs are not benefiting from their reign of terror throughout the Middle East and oppression of their own people. Not only is it the just thing to do towards them, but it also will bring a stable, just, and lasting peace to the Middle East sooner than the contrary policy.
Okay, last question. Our European allies, I asked Brian Hook about. He thinks they're getting on board. What say you? Do you see them finally figuring out that the JCPOA was a fool's errand and fool's gold and a dummy's idea? You know, the Metternich of MSNBC, Ben Rhodes, was out there crying about it every day, and Brian Hook dismissed that. But what do you think about our European allies? Does Ben Rhodes still have them under his hypnotic effect?
Well, Hugh, I'll simply say that it's very hard for people to admit when they were wrong. So I would settle for the European allies simply to recognize the situation on the ground today. Well, Iran is no longer adhering to the nuclear deal either, and their people are rising up in protests and facing a crackdown by the Ayatollahs. If they'd be willing to do that and join us in our campaign of maximum pressure and sanctions against Iran, I wouldn't demand that they apologize for and express their regrets about the mistake that was the Iran nuclear deal.
Do you worry, though, they attacked our drone, they attacked Saudi Arabia, because in response to the maximum pressure campaign, are you worried that we ought to be extremely vigilant right now that Iran will try a diversion again?
Iran ought to be extremely worried about the American response if they were to provoke us, especially if they were to injure an American soldier or citizen in Iraq or Qatar or Bahrain or anywhere else we have Americans throughout the Middle East.
Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator. Iran remains front and center, but I return to the speech that Bill Barr gave on Friday night. I want to make sure you hear the rest of it, which you will do if you continue to listen to the third hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show coming up. We will post the Brian Hook and Tom Cotton interviews on Iran so people can quote them and send them around. It's very important people understand how significant the action Secretary Pompeo took yesterday with President Trump's blessing. And it's very important that people hear the Attorney General's full speech, which I will continue in hour 3 of today's Hugh Hewitt Show. Stay tuned.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hugh-niverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hugh-niverse.com.